It is Easter today. It is by far one of the most confusing holidays for Unitarians because the rest of the year, most churches claim our paganism is bad, right? But go figure. Anyway, the actual gospel accounts of Easter, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, it's what is pushed into the UU church in the first place. It's what pushed me there. The actual accounts. My worst day of seminary, I hate to relive it, but I have to tell you about it. It was around April of my first year, and we finally got to the gospel. We used to read the Bible all the way through. And so we finally got to the gospels, and I found out, unfortunately, that my very divine Jesus had some very not divine rewrites. Instead of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it is actually Mark and then Luke and Acts are written by the same person probably, and then a lot of those letters from Paul, and then Matthew, and then John. And why was that my worst day? Why is that so sad? Well, Mark's Jesus, let me tell you, while though the most relatable for me, it's by far the most confusing. They called him Son of Man instead of Son of God. That Jesus wanted to sleep on the boat. That Jesus was always craving a fish sandwich like a Catholic on Friday. Do you all still go to McDonald's? That Jesus wanted to disappear and pray for weeks. That Jesus had his out of office email on. And so apparently that Jesus was not good enough. They reversed the order and put Matthew first when they were compiling the books of the Bible. Because according to the words that Matthew put in Jesus' mouth, he was here to fulfill the law and to make church the most important thing in all of the people's lives. Yikes, come to find out that that capital C church word that's in Matthew, ecclesia, didn't exist in those early gospels. Nor did they exist in those early letters from Paul to all those different churches. They were in house churches and Paul was giving them advice. And that ecclesia word wasn't a thing yet. So that didn't come before Matthew. Now, here was the real kicker for me. They think Matthew was probably written 30 years after Jesus. The language choices, the sophisticated Greek, same with John. And if they think the sophisticated Greek came later, it's the exact opposite of the rudimentary language in Mark. Mark was written in very common language that was used the way people talk to each other. Like, just imagine finding a book and its text messages versus an author. You can tell the difference. And this is how people that study the Bible and a lot of Unitarians that have found their way away from it find out these things. They find out these differences that just don't make any sense. Now, John was probably written 50 years after Jesus died. That's difficult because it was the first time recalling any divinity claims when they studied these things. It was the first time claiming that Jesus had gone to a better place to replace or exchange for our naughtiness. That's called atonement theology, and that was new. And I did not like that. If John was written in about 80 AD, the life expectancy of a person at that time was like 40 years old. Jesus was an old man if he lived. And I did not like that. But then heard a famous atheist on TV, one of those late night shows like David Letterman or something, asking someone, why do you believe like that? It was an atheist. And he said very plainly, I'm not against it. I just can't believe what I don't believe. And that really stuck with me. And so since it was around this time that I found this out in the school year, I decided to go to my first Seder. Also, I went to one with the young souls at home, and I had a very different experience. I was sitting there and enjoying what felt like a serene and blessed ceremony as a rabbi led us through the part. And if anyone doesn't know what a Seder is, it's the Passover celebration that Jews celebrate in every year. And I was sitting there enjoying it, and they got up to open the door to let Elijah in, if any of you have experienced that. And Elijah's supposed to come in, and the Spirit's supposed to create wind in the space. And it's time to just kind of stop the holy part of it and just kind of talk to your neighbor and chit chat. And someone across from me, we were at these long tables with different people. This was All Souls DC, which is very diverse for anyone new visiting who doesn't know. And the person across from me said, he kind of chuckled and he said, man, I really love this stuff. I loved growing up like this with all the fairy tales involved. And I still think about that sometimes. I think about what it means to sit in a sacred space for some people and to make such a flippant comment about them being fairy tales. And the reason why I still think about this is because as Unitarians, sometimes we prioritize every other religion over our Christian and Jewish friends. We prioritize being atheists, we prioritize being humanists, we prioritize paganism, we prioritize everything but that. But what does that do to people looking to find themselves in our space? Because we say that's welcome. We pay homage to our founding. We say we want diversity because we do want Black and brown people to come and be comfortable, right? Knowing that most of them are probably coming as converts from Christian churches. We do want to appreciate how important holidays are in the lives of people, right? But just not those. And I wonder how much of our church hurt gets in the way of being inclusive and being a real neighbor. This is also the season where Purim is celebrated in our Jewish communities. And this celebrates the sacrifice of Esther. And it's a very salacious story. And since we have kids in the congregation, I'm not going to tell the details. But let's just say that Esther found herself as a wife to the king because she was the finest mama in all the people who were trying out to become queen. And so the queen doesn't normally talk to the king very regularly in these days in these stories, but Esther was so beautiful and so eloquent that when she requested a meeting, the king was happy to speak with her. And so what is celebrated was a decree had been set for mass violence against her people. And her cousin Mordecai, who served in the kingdom, who served in the castle, had stayed around to make sure she was okay. And he found his way to her and he told her to speak up. Famous line, because maybe she has come to power for such a time as these. And she spoke up and her people were spared. Just like what we know of Jesus' ministry. He spoke up for marginalized people. He was proactive in asking people how involved they wanted to be in their own healing. Do you want to be healed? He was clear about people's own agency. Why are you waking me up when I'm taking a nap when you all could calm the sea? Why are you telling me these people want fish sandwiches when you all could just make filet of fish with your own power? He was a prophet. And maybe not in the traditional sense of the word for us, but there's another definition in the dictionary that I really love that refers to political leaders and ministers just like you and me, and your seats all there and on Zoom. In a faith that prioritizes social justice and presence in the face of wrongdoing, the definition of prophecy focuses on speaking truth to power. I always chuckle when I see that phrase on TV because it actually comes from a theology book by Walter Brueggemann. It's one of my favorite books. He's talking about Moses being fearless in the face of Pharaoh to let his people go. And he works on the concept around what it means to be in a position out in the margins, because Moses had left and he was like growing a beard and taking care of sheep like it was the pandemic. And he empowers him and he says, I have a speech impediment, I don't want to go. And he says, well, bring Aaron with you. And so Brueggemann talks in this book about speaking truth to power. People in power need to be able to hear from the people on the margins, because often the more you push people outside of the center, the more they're actually experiencing everyday life. I think it's interesting when we see the unemployment rate is down, but we know that really just means people are underemployed because there's people with master's degrees driving Uber, but that was a tangent. And so speaking truth to power is something that if Jesus was alive today would be doing. He might be in a tent, starving in Gaza, which is miles away from where he was born. If Moses were alive today, he might be organizing aid trucks to get through those blockades at the Egyptian border. You don't have to be divine to be a prophet. Just a human is powerful enough. There's so much change happening in this congregation right now. There's so many roles that are available to refresh, so much light to be resurrected, so much truth to plant, so much healing to water, so many luncheons to be had. The possibilities in this building and on this Zoom today are so multitudinous. And so pick up your passions and get ready for the spring. Get ready for new things. Open the door and let the breeze come in. Get ready to speak life into your prophecies. For maybe you've come to power for such a time as these. Amen, and may it be so.